what is the goal for essentially this code customization? What we want to be able to do is we want to be able to call a custom stored procedure to retrieve the records to display. And in the custom stored procedures, what we want to be able to do is when we call this, we want to be able to pass a parameter to the stored procedure. So in this particular case, for example, I'm showing a grid. And in this grid, what I have is the ability to essentially show all of the records from the customer table retrieved based on essentially a filter criteria. And the filter criteria is the country that is displayed over there. So imagine, for example, that I select Canada in this case. And so what we want to do is display all of the different customers that are in Canada. If I change that to something else, and that's what I will like to display. Let me at this point in time switch over to the application, if I can do that, and show you how that would work. Hang on just 1 second while I switch over and show you this okay. I'm going to try to bring up. Dwayne is asking actually on the file upload question, do you, on the file upload, how do you scan for viruses? That's a very good question. Typically what you would have to do, Dwayne, is that you would have to kind of implement your own version of that in terms of being able to, before you upload, then you would call essentially some kind of virus scan program in order to essentially accomplish that. So it's not something that, I particularly have an example for you on that. You'll have to effectively do that yourself. In general, what happens with scanning for viruses, for example, or doing things of that nature, you would effectively have to implement a link there. Now, one of the other things that happens if you load it to a file system, presumably your scanning that is installed on the system will take care of that and identify that and possibly quarantine that as needed. So that's something that you can obviously do as well. But that's really up to you in terms of how you set that up. I don't particularly have an example, but certainly you can do that. Keep in mind that obviously different file types will require different kind of scanning as well, so that for example, if there are text files and things of that nature, you may not have to do anything with that. But if they are obviously Word or Doc or PDF files, that obviously may be a different scenario over there. So I'm trying to open up, again, I apologize, I'm trying to open up this application so that I can show you how this would work. And because I was on a different machine, it requires me to set up all of the database connection strings and so on in addition to that. Okay. While it sets that up, let me go through and continue with the rest of the presentation over here. And so what we want to do basically is the strategy for defining a custom stored procedure is the following. What we want to do is, number one, of course, define this custom stored procedure. Number two, what we want to do is create a page to display the results. And then number three is do the actual code customization in the code in order to handle that. So how do we do that? Well, let's take a simple stored procedure over here that takes country as a parameter and returns the data set. Well, what that stored procedure might look like in SQL Server is defined as something like this, for example. It's a fairly simple thing. What it does is it defines a stored procedure called mySP, takes one parameter called p_country, which is a maximum of 100 characters. And then what it does basically is checks to see the actual code itself in the stored procedure is if the country is blank, then it returns all of the customers. Otherwise, it basically uses the country, a where clause where you specify the country is equal to the passed-in parameter. That's basically the stored procedure that I will have here. Now, in this particular case, you could effectively make it much more fancy in terms of not to display or display a default default country or something to that effect, but it's really up to you of how you define that stored procedure. What I want to focus on is how can you actually call this stored procedure and from your application. So with that, let's talk about how you would go about creating a stored procedure and calling this stored procedure. So what you would do essentially is create a page. In this particular case, you would essentially go to File, New menu, and select the blank page from the general section that is available to you on that dialog box. You would define two controls on this particular page. You would effectively go in and type in on the HTML page two things. One is the ASP:\dropdown list, and then the ASP:\gridView. Both of these controls basically are standard .NET controls that you can display on the page. And what we will do is we will effectively utilize standard .NET code in order to essentially call this custom stored procedure using the IronSpeed Designer generated data access layer, retrieve the values, and effectively display these in the standard .NET controls. In the ASP:\gridView, you will notice a few things over here. Number one, you will notice is that we also support paging. So what you would effectively do is call the on-PageIndexChanging, specify an on-PageIndexChanging attribute with the name of the function that will be called whenever the user changes the page number. And then you would also, of course, set the allow paging to be true, and the first page is what is currently displayed initially here. In the application itself, you would need to do a variety of things that allows you to effectively be called back whenever there is a value, basically, whenever the user changes, for example, in this particular case, the country value on the screen. So in this particular case, what would happen is you would create essentially a handler init handler for the country field in your page dropdown. This particular case, all you would effectively do is specify that every time the country changes, we are going to essentially be called back, and that's why you would set the auto post back to be true. Again, this is pretty much standard .NET that you would be doing here. The next thing that I would like to do here is then whenever the country value changes, I would like to essentially call the load method and essentially handle the load event so that I can effectively load the drop-down list with all of the countries in the database. So in this case, what I'm going to do is when I handle the load event, I'm going to use standard IronSpeed data access layer classes that will allow me to retrieve all of the countries and be able to populate this thing. Now I'm going to do this thing in a kind of a simple way so that it actually retrieves more records at this point in time, but you can make it more efficient later on. But for the time being, what I'm going to do is I'm only going to populate all of the countries that are actually in the customers table. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to define essentially a where clause in this particular case and read all of the customers' record. But the where clause actually that I'm going to pass in is going to be blank. So that's why you see get records and pass with the blank where clause. So in this case, what I'm saying is I want to retrieve all of the customers' records from the database. But I'm going to pass an order by clause that is displayed over here. And what I will do is set up the order by clause based on the value that is essentially available to me on the country. So if there are items in the country drop-down, then I specify the order by clause to essentially order by country here in an ascending format. And so that way what will happen is that when I populate the drop-down, I don't need to sort it again. So, you know, the A countries will be first and the Z countries will be the last automatically as I'm filling in. And then what I'm doing here is that for every customer record that's read in, I simply add that to my country drop-down unless it's already contained in that drop-down. So this way, basically, we only add the unique countries effectively. Finally, we create a list item for please select so that the country, by default, the field shows please select, and unless I select the country, nothing happens until that point in time. So that's the first step that I did, which is populate the country dropdown. Now what we need to do effectively is handle the selected index change. So whenever the end user selects, like for example, a country like USA, what we want to be able to do is load the data in the grid. In this case, what we will do is call the load grid control function, and we'll look at the load grid control function in a minute. But this function, selected index change, is called whenever the user changes the value. Keep in mind that we set the auto post back to true earlier on. How does my load grid control look like? Well, my load grid control is fairly straightforward. What I will do here is essentially set the allow paging to be true, because I want to make sure that we have multiple pages displayed. We don't want to display all of the records at the same time. What we will do is we'll call the custom stored procedure function that I've written, and this will simply return a data set, and that is saved in the data source for the grid. And so that's basically, again, a fairly simple and straightforward thing. It just uses the grid's data source variable and sets it to the value returned from our custom stored procedure call. And then finally, I do some other housekeeping over here, which is I set the auto-generate columns to true, I set the data bind, and I set visible to true. And this way, it allows me to effectively take care of displaying the values. But really, the meat of this thing is really to look at the call custom stored procedure function over here. Now, what we have done in IronSpeed Designer is made the ability to handle the custom stored procedure in a much easier way. But before I display that, I want to also talk about the page index changing and some of the other methods that you would set up. You would effectively, in the case of page index changing, this is kind of, again, standard .NET that you would do is you would set the new page index for the grid and effectively rebind the grid view control with the data from the session. Keep in mind that in the earlier code that we saw, load grid control, we saved the contents of the data source in a session variable called data set. And the reason why we do that is so that we do not have to reload the data again. Now, one of the things that we could do is make this more efficient, so the stored procedure takes a page number as a second parameter. But for the purpose of this, I haven't done that. If you want, you can certainly do that as well, so that way you are loading the data every time the page index changes rather than retrieving it from the session. But for the purpose of this argument, for this code customization, I just retrieve it from the session and then essentially specify the next page in the data source. So this way the grid view is just simply rebound and the next page is displayed. Okay, stored procedure. How do we do that? Well, we have defined a bunch of classes in the base classes DLL, which allow you to make calls to stored procedures very easily. There are a few steps that we go through in order to define how to call a stored procedure. Number one is you would effectively configure the parameters for your stored procedure. In this case, you create a variable called first parameter, and you create an instance of this parameter, give it the name of the field, name of the parameter that the stored procedure is expecting, what is the value, what is the data type, and which direction is it going? Is it an input or an output parameter? In this case, we have only one, so we just define that first parameter, and then we set the parameter list effectively to be just list of the first parameter. If we had multiple parameters, then we would have more lines of code over here. We would set parameter list of 1 to be the second parameter, and so on. You don't need to do these steps if the stored procedure does not accept any parameters here, so you can just skip step 1 and step 2. Next thing what we need to do is we need to actually create a link to the stored procedure effectively. And the way that we do that is to specify the connection string. Well, the way that you can specify the connection string is you can look in the web.config and use the name of the connection string of your database rather than the string itself. So in this case, you've already specified, and this usually would be called something like database Northwind 1 or database, whatever the name of your database is. So this particular class, StoredProcedure class, takes 3 parameters: the name of the database connection string, the name of the stored procedure, and the parameter list. So that's step 3 that you would do. You're just simply defining how you would call the stored procedure. Finally, the step 4 and the last step is that you would run the stored procedure and return the results back. And if you look at that, there is a method called runQuery that is defined on the stored procedure class, which simply returns true or false based on whether the stored procedure was run successfully or not. If it was run successfully, then all of the values that are returned by the stored procedure are returned in a variable called dataset, and all I do is I simply return my stored procedure.dataset, and this will be then bound to the data source of the grid view that I saw earlier. So that's how easy it is for you to call a stored procedure and return the dataset values that are returned back. And that's pretty much it for in terms of actually being able to specify and call a stored procedure. So with that,